W- Welcome to Globespan. Tonight we have a round table, and with us are four guests. We are going to be dealing with a very, very interesting subject. My name is Paul near Tennessee, and I have with me our co-host, Mr. Floyd Haynes, who's a businessman, a professor at the University of District of Columbia in Washington, D.C., the president of the Roraima Institute. He also serves on the local content panel in Guyana, and quite recently they filed their report to the president and the government of Guyana. We also have with us tonight Mr. Timothy Jonas, who is a senior counsel in Guyana and the chair of a new United Guyana. He is a very regular commentator here on Globespan, known to many of you. We also have with us a very interesting guest from our neighboring country, the birthplace of the great Simon Bolivar, Venezuela. We have with us Mr. Rafael Mendez. Mr. Mendez is the president of the Venezuela Chamber of Importers and Distributors of Reagents for Clinical Diagnosis and Research. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. I also would like to point out to our audience that tonight, as perhaps never before, at 7:45 after the break, the program will be open to the guests, to the folks who are listening in to the program. All you have to do, you will see at the bottom of the screen there is a number, 631-782-9272. You could use your phone, your iPhone, through WhatsApp and call in. You could, if you would like, you could show your face. If you don't want to show your face, it's quite okay, but you would be able to participate. You have to be short, you have to be sharp, and you have to be focused because we want as many people all across the world who are listening to the program to participate. So we begin tonight on this roundtable to address a very important question. Can Guyana learn from the good and the bad experiences of oil producing countries around the world? Rafael, I'd like to start with you. Can you make an initial reflection on the answer to this question?
Okay, as I told you a few days ago, I think that Guyana have a golden opportunity in this moment, okay, to develop a industrial process that could be viable, competitive, and successful if you follow the good example from certain countries, and Venezuela, I think, that can provide good examples of what needs to be done. Unfortunately, it also gives you good examples of the mistakes that are not to be repeated, and also certain things that we should have done in the past, but we didn't. Okay? I think one of the most important things that Venezuela got in the initial times of the oil industry after the first 20, 30 years, when the multinational companies were controlling the industry, the oil production in Venezuela, was to get a very broad-based national agreement. All the sectors, politicians, professionals in all areas, aim to the professionalization of high-level technical and managerial staff. And there were two reasons to do that. The first one was to face the impositions of the multinational oil companies during those times when the industry was under their control. But also, and it was the most important thing, was to face this challenge of managing the industry after the nationalization and managing the industry with a perspective of nationalism, but also with a criteria of business efficiency with a minimum of state intervention. If politics comes to the industry, you will have no good business, and at the end, you will be only another oil exporter. And that's where you lose the opportunity. PDVSA, which is a local national oil company, was managed for years under the concept of meritocracy. Okay, and we built a top company, and even today, the staff from PDVSA is helping to develop the oil industry in countries beyond our borders. This same broad agreement was also directed to finance countries' infrastructure. In the 60s, and you were there, you remember during the 60s and the 70s, thousands of kilometers of roads were built, hundreds of health centers, dozens of universities, and thousands of industries were installed in the country. With the oil boom that we have in the 70s, we also created one fund that was aimed to, at least in theory, to prevent the country's economy from being inundated by all the brutal oil monies coming from the oil export. So we could avoid, it was the main reason of the fund, the shock and all the distortions that these revenues were going to produce in our economy. I mean, the general concept was to have to make policy, not politics, okay? And there was the fundamental purpose was summarized in just one sentence: to sow the seeds of oil. And that's what we really tried to do. Unfortunately, it didn't happen as we expected. Despite,
Thank you for
just
that.
tell me.
Thank you for that initial reflection, and we'll come back to, as we said, the good and the bad.
Yeah.
Floyd, what is your initial reflection on the question? You have traveled a lot all over the world.
Well, I think one thing Guyana can learn for sure is that oil in and of itself, or the discovery of oil, is not a magic bullet. And you can look at other countries that have developed and produced oil, and you will find that in spite of the development and the production and the sale of oil, those countries have not managed to achieve any kind of sustainable growth and development. And the reason cited is something called the natural resource curse. I myself don't like the word curse. I prefer to use the natural resource burden. I think a curse is something that cannot be lifted. A burden is something that you can get rid of if you put the right systems and those types of things in place. So I coined that phrase, the natural resource burden. But it is an observation that countries blessed with an abundance of natural resource tend to grow or develop at a lesser pace than their less endowed counterparts. Now, the reason given for this observation is something known, but it's twofold. One of it is political, one is economics. The political has to do with transparency, accountability, and ultimately corruption. The economic has to do with the Dutch disease. And let me explain that briefly, and then we'll kind of sit back and listen. But the Dutch disease is a condition. It's a condition that has several manifestations or symptoms, if you may. You have the moving or the movement effect, and that is the movement of capital and resources from above ground other industries into the oil industries in search of higher wages. And what that does, as these resources and capital move away from the above ground industries, those industries ultimately collapses. There is the spending effect. The spending effect has to do with inflows of government revenues. And so the government is now spending a lot, creates inflation and those types of things. And thirdly, there is the exchange rate appreciation effect. And that is an appreciation in your exchange rate as a result of increased foreign exchange. And what that does, it raises the price for your locally produced goods and services, making them non-competitive. So that's sort of in a nutshell the Dutch disease, which is the cause, one of the causes cited for the natural resource or natural resource burden. The question is, how can Guyana overcome these things? I believe the policy response to most of these things, and I hope we can talk about them, is well documented by experts, by economists, by academics. The real question is, do we have the political will, the culture, and the kind of leadership to implement those policies and make sure that they work and they ultimately can mitigate some of these things that prevents sustainable growth and development? So I think it's more a question of leadership, management, political will. The policy response is well documented. There are several things we can do, and I hope we get into them further in the show.
Sure we would. Timothy, what is your take on this question, my brother?
Thanks, Paul. I like what Floyd said. I agree with what he said, and I agree with the careful way that he wants to approach it, because it has to be done with care. There are many more failed experiments than successful experiments when you look around the world. I think that we have to identify our differences. We are not the same as Uganda or Venezuela or Nigeria. Our population is much smaller. Our alternatives, I think, are more generous. The other industries, the other resources which we have in Guyana. So I don't think that we should be blindly following a template that is set by another country whose variables may be different from ours. For example, Mr. Mendez spoke about the dozens of universities built in Venezuela in the 70s and 80s. Now, I've heard our administration talk about that, building oil and gas specialist, tertiary institutions. With a population of less than 1 million, we have to be careful about blindly following what others have done in a way that may not be sustainable. We already have institutions which have evolved even with our corruption and our shortage of money and our difficulties. I would prefer to see us evolve what we have rather than start something revolutionary, because if you begin to spend as if the money will never run out, you will aggravate the issues that Floyd was talking about, the issues of inflation, the issues of the grandiose promises politicians like to make that aren't met, and the resulting disparity in wealth that will create social chaos. Remember, in a society as small as ours, the people who will be benefiting enormously can't hide it. Their wealth will be visible to the poor. And the fact that you rub shoulders and you live side by side means that the disparity will be so obvious and the injustices will be so in your face that it will lead to problems in a society where we already have a police force that can't deal with our crime and cannot investigate and cannot deal with the incoming Venezuelans and Brazilians. We are already on infrastructural overload. And I think we have to be careful to evolve things slowly rather than follow blindly into the mistakes others have made.
Well, I think we would have consensus around this table that one size does not fit all. That has always been my criticism in the work I did with the World Bank and the IMF, where they used to design policies in the 80s of one size to fit all. And it's a terrible thing. I always remember a story where we were discussing philosophy and somebody orders a coffin without finding out how tall the man is. And so when you bring the dead and he's 6 feet tall and the coffin is 5 feet, you have to chop the man up to put him in the coffin. But let's hope that would not happen in Guyana. Rafael, the reason why it's very interesting to have you on this program with three Guyanese is because you're next door to us, and people keep saying, no, no, we can't go the way of Venezuela. I would not have thought, Rafael, in all the decades from 68 to last year, November, as I go to Venezuela so regularly, that I would have seen Venezuelan refugees in Guyana. I was in Bogota last Christmas around this time. I never thought I would have seen Venezuelan refugees in the plaza of Bogota. Rafael, what do you believe? What happened? You said that Venezuela did very well in building up its technical know-how and its expertise to run the industry, and the technocrats did it for a while. But then there was a struggle between the technocrats and the politicians. Tell us a bit about that. How do you avoid that? How can we have a relationship in Guyana between a growing technocratic class that we will have to develop, that is Guyanese, and the politicians? How does one avoid that?
One of the problems that we face in the country, and I think it's one of the reasons why we are where we are right now, is when you start to handle business in terms of politics with a populism, trying to have everybody happy. Okay, and a good example was what happened in my country. We have all the infrastructure, all the technicians, but we forgot, and that is one of the reasons when you have the inflation, we forgot to have or to allow our businessmen, our industries to compete against the other markets. We have a private sector that was working under a framework of protection. I remember in those times the custom taxes were around 60%. 20 or 40% of the products were not allowed to be imported. You need a special license from the government. So what happened is that it doesn't matter what type of business you install. You were sure that the 100% of your production was going to be sold because you were protected. And of course, if you have protection, you have high prices, and then have inflation. So one of the very first things I think a country has to do when you try to come into these processes is to have an open market, a real open market. You have to push, okay, your industries, your business guys to compete. Because what you will try to do is to be a reliable supplier for your customers overseas. And that's what we forgot. If you need to buy, you need to export. And that's what we forgot in the country. And then we felt we were rich. So each president was offering more and more and more things, okay, to the point that a guy working in agriculture, okay, was able to spend 2 weeks or 1 month in Miami in a 5-star hotel, okay? That's what you have to avoid, populism. You have to try to have a competitive sector to export. You don't have to protect your people, your industries inside, because it's not going to work. What Floyd says is true. You will pay high salaries, so you will tend to destroy your traditional economy. That's what happened in Venezuela. That is true. But what if what we have in the future is just high quality jobs? And when I talk about high quality jobs, is that you can have guy working in the agricultural area, like the guy that you have in Germany, with good payment because the economy can pay for that, and you have very good salaries working in the petrochemical, in the plastic industry. That's what we have to look for, because if we face the future just with despair, no, we cannot do it. We have the problem of inflation. We have this and that problem, okay? When we go to economics, if you compete with the international markets, you will be able to have a healthy economy. I think that's the main topic, is no politicians doing those things they are accustomed to do, offering free this, free that, free the other, okay? And that's the reason why I talk about a national project. Is the whole country facing that. And you don't have to allow all that money coming into the country. If you allow all that income coming into the Guyanese economy, you will destroy everything.
Absolutely.
And you have good examples that really work. The Norway pension fund that is retaining the flows in excess of the high peak, or the Alaska Permanent Fund that is saving 20 or 25% of the oil monies to dedicate that money for future generation that would no longer have oil as a resource. So there are ways to stop the money coming in, and there are ways, okay, to allow your industry, your businessman, okay, to be competitive. If not, you are going to repeat the example of Venezuela, that for 25 years we were the richest country, apparently, of Latin America, and it really was a very poor country because what we create wasn't competitive, wasn't sustainable. And in that sense, I agree with Floyd.
So, gentlemen, is there a response to what Rafael reflected on just now? Would you all like to add anything, or?
I think the example cited by Rafael is a good one. And I also agree with, I think either Paul, you or Tim said earlier, there is no one size fits all. The Norway or the Norwegian model has often been cited, and there are some good things about that model, but we cannot just uplift that model and impose it on Guyana. You have to remember, when Norway discovered oil, it was a fairly developed country. It had infrastructure, it had developed institutions. Guyana, and therefore, it allowed them to do exactly what Rafael said, which is a good thing, and that is to take some of that money and invest it outside of the country. In fact, that's one of the ways to avoid the exchange rate appreciation, as well as the increased government spending. So that was a good thing. We have to do that, but we have to balance that against our needs. Guyana has some immediate needs, things like healthcare, certainly lacking of infrastructure, education. And so while I'm not advocating that we take all the money and put it in, and I don't recommend putting it into the operating budget either. There are other ways to do those types of things without the revenue becoming part of the operating budget. But I think we have to balance how much money we put aside versus how much money we use. Because you're right, the oil revenue, the sovereign wealth fund and those things is intergenerational. Future generation has a right to benefit from the oil that's being produced now, because as we know, it's depletable. And at some point, it will run out. There's also something that Norway did that I thought was admirable. They did not borrow against future oil revenues. They were careful not to do that, because oil is a volatile commodity. There are booms and busts cycles in the oil industry. And you can get yourself into trouble by borrowing when the prices are high and having to pay back when the prices are low. Or once the oil runs out, you're stuck with this. The discovery of oil, one of the things it does, it creates the illusion that you're super duper rich and you have can't done money. and therefore you behave like you have can't done money. But as we all know, that's not true. And a lot of these, beware of the institutions and the good friends that come knocking at your door offering to loan you money. Be very aware, because you have to decide what's right for Guyana. But I agree, there's no one size fits all. But we can learn some things from places that have done it successfully.
Tim, you want to add something?
Yeah. I agree with what was said, but I'd like to condescend upon particulars. When you talk about inflation and you talk about the appreciation of your currency, these are concepts that absolutely need to be protected against. And as Floyd said, Norway was already a developed country, so didn't need a capital injection like Guyana does. Right now in Guyana, there's a big debate where the unions are trying to say that the minimum wage needs to be increased, I think, to $60,000 or something a month. That's $300 US. We are very, very far away from being worried that the increase in prices in Guyana is going to put our labor force out of reach so that the businesses cannot afford labor and therefore will fold. We have a far way to go. Our infrastructure is so primitive and so tiny that we need an immediate and large capital injection to deal with roads and bridges and our sea defense and our drainage and our irrigation and to start our agriculture going. We need capital to get our nurses and teachers and police up to speed so that they are earning properly and can live. So we can't compare ourselves to Norway. Floyd is absolutely right about that. And it would be a mistake to pretend that there is an immediate alarm, an immediate fear that our labor force will suddenly not be affordable and that the escalation in cost of labor will mean that local businesses are no longer viable. We are a long, long way from that. So I think what we need to do is set targets. We need to have annual, maybe quarterly, targets of what infrastructural targets must be met, targets in terms of public service, in terms of education, in terms of medical facilities. And if we can incrementally meet those targets by capital expenditure, remember, as each of those targets is met, it involves hiring local labor, it involves bringing in experienced folk. And I think that is how you manage it. So yes, you don't just land all the money in the country. That will create chaos. That's like the medieval kings throwing gold on the streets of the villages when they pass through. You can't do that. But we are far behind. We're not Norway. And we mustn't pretend that we're Norway and that the issue of the cost of labor in Guyana is going to be, an immediate concern. We are still paying $300 US a month to our labor force.
Well, I'll shift a little bit now to the reality in Guyana. Now, Floyd, you are on a panel called the Local Content Panel. And we are aware that in adopting local content policies, there are broad policy statements, and if we move towards legislation. But what type of policies, gentlemen, all three of you believe that perhaps in Guyana is best suited to diversify the economy and enhance the qualitative impact of the income that will come from oil in terms of sustainable livelihoods in the country? Floyd, could you give it a shot first?
Yes, I think you have to go back to protecting your traditional above ground industries. And, as you begin to receive the revenues from the oil, some of those revenues could go towards helping to diversify and protect those industries. One of the things Norway did also that I thought was very, very good, and this goes to a slightly different problem, but I'll mention it anyway. They disaggregated the management of the oil industry. And what I mean by that is they had one group handling the policy formation. They had another group handling the commercialization, which is the development and the production. And they had a third group doing developing the regulatory framework. And by sort of separating or disaggregating, you created sort of separation of duties, which can mitigate any kind of corruption. It doesn't eliminate it, but it mitigates it. I thought that was so that you have no one group or one body under which all of this thing falls. And each of these groups were independent and had the requisite authority to manage its portfolio. I think that is a very, very good strategy, and perhaps something that ought to be looked at. But in terms of diversifying the economy, I think it's a couple of things. It is to protect the traditional industries, but as well as using local content policy to do exactly what it's intended to do, and that is to make sure that Guyana and Guyanese get a fair share of the oil and gas industry. And because of that, what you will find, if the local content policy is properly implemented, monitored, evaluated, and those types of things, you will see that there will be ancillary industries that will spring up around the oil industry. You know, the upstream value chain comprises of several aspects of it's beyond just the development and the production of oil. And to the extent that we can, so you have the value chain across and the supply chain going up like this. If you can think of this as a spreadsheet, to the extent that we can isolate the various aspects of that value chain and then become part of the supply chain that feeds it, I think it will go a great way towards creating other industries. But again, I hope we can talk about this. A lot of it is political will and leadership.
Rafael, from the experience in Venezuela with local content, how successful and unsuccessful? What was the good and bad experience?
Okay. I'm going to put an example of something that we did in a very, very shyly way. Okay, I come from the plastic sector. I was working with plastics, representing international companies for more than 20 years. So that's an area that I know very well. And I'm going to put an example. We are now a society in pandemic, right? And how many masks, how many face shields are sold in the whole world in this moment? How many metric tons of polymers are you using in this moment to satisfy that demand? Okay? And those products are coming from oil. I mean, if you dream a little and you want to have a development that goes across the whole country, just imagine you have oil, you have gas. With the oil and the gas, you can produce something called monomers. Monomers are the basic form of the polymers. Okay, it's the basic, it's the raw material. You can do it out of the gas, out of the oil. Then with that you can produce the polymers, the plastics. Okay, polyolefins, engineering plastic, synthetic rubber. Those are two different types of industries. Monomers go to the big polymers producer, but the polymers producers will sell their products to small, medium, large companies, private companies, producing everything you can imagine: bags, pipes, tubes, shoes, masks, face shields. When you go to that, in that way, I mean, you can have several small companies in Guyana producing bags, producing shoes, okay, producing your own mask, producing non-woven that also come from the oil, okay, for all disposable products. I mean, you could have hundreds of companies, small companies, medium companies in the country. And all that is coming from oil if you handle that in the proper way. The technology to do that is available because technology is just a commodity. As a matter of fact, one of the more profitable products for the big companies is to license their technology. So it's there. You can get it buying the license, having joint ventures, okay? You can have, let's say, a program to call the investors to Guyana. I don't know. You have a tax incentive for the companies installing factories, big factories on Guyanese soil. A 15% flat rate tax for 10 years. They will get the return of the investment in 2 or 3 years. They will get a profit, and you will have that factory there producing. So it's not so complicated. And as I said, you are surrounded by plastic. You can produce also fertilizers, other chemicals. But the beautiful thing in this particular view of the economy is that you can help to develop hundreds of thousands of small businesses. You can produce bags in a place that is just 40, 50 square meters with a small machine to satisfy your local needs. But you can also grow and have a big factory to export to your Caribbean friends. I mean, there is a whole world there that I think that Guyana should explore. And as I said in the beginning, what you have to try to avoid is just to be another oil exporter, receiving money, destroying your traditional economy, okay, for nothing, because at the end, you will pay for that, and it's not going to be a nice price, the one you will get.
Okay, we have 5 minutes to the break. Timothy, you could begin your comment to what Floyd and Rafael said, and then at 7:45 when we go on the break, we come back, you'll continue. So what is your initial response to these two gentlemen, Timothy?
I'm a great believer in private enterprise and small government. So I cannot dispute that if an entity wants to come to say we are going to use the oil to make plastics, well and good and welcome, as long as you are a good corporate citizen, you're paying your taxes and you're employing people on fair terms, wonderful. I worry about attempts by government to try to specifically encourage any investment in a specific direction and involvement by government in projects that are commercially based. A commercial project should be done by a businessman who risks his own capital and sinks or swims. So I like what I hear, but to me, any evolution of the oil industry needs to be done in the context of private investment, private industry, so that people take risks. And the role of the government should not extend beyond facilitating an environment that is conducive to investment. So I like what I heard about the disparity in a tax structure to encourage investment, but also to give advantage to your Guyanese. Once we keep small government and once it is done in a competitive basis, I like it. It's interesting that we talk about plastics because a lot of in our environmentally conscious future, a lot of people have a knee-jerk reaction about plastic. But before we launch into an attack on that basis, I would like to remind anyone who's listening that you have single-use plastics, but then you also have plastics which are very, very advantageous. I'll give you an example that is specific for Guyana, and it's something I've been talking to an engineer about and we need. Anybody who drives in Georgetown and drives on our coast knows, for example, that our drains are V-shaped. They're wide at the top and they slope down at the bottom, because if you make a drain with 90-degree side walls, the earth will crumble in and collapse. And what's been happening in Georgetown is the drains get wider and wider until they're almost to the road. And then the dirt, the soil under the road caves in and the roads begin to collapse. And we're seeing deteriorating roads, Thomas Lands, Caricesta Avenue, South Road. The engineer was telling me that there has actually been developed very good, very strong, very durable pile sheeting made of plastic, not metal, that is interlocking and can be used to line our drains and prevent that erosion. So we get our parapets back, we get our space back. And that is a specific large scale need that could be met through the oil industry indirectly. And that will be environmentally friendly because we're not cutting down trees to do it with wood like it's done outside State House, and can work throughout Georgetown and prevent the erosion that we see taking place all around us. So there's a lot that can be done, and I like what I hear, but I would like to say private investment, private industry.
Well, thank you.
Oh, can I make a very quick point, or
Yeah.
you're out of time?
Go ahead, Floyd.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I believe President Ali and Vice President Barajagdio fully understands the need for diversification and the fact that we cannot just be an oil exporter and develop the country. Both have said to us in our remit, you must look at all of the industries that are affected by the oil industry: construction, insurance, welding. And so banking, all of the various industries. And so they understand the need to diversify the economy. And so I think we're off to a good start.
Well, gentlemen, we'll take a quick break at 7:45 and we will be back. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the time in which the oil sector is developing in Guyana, COVID-19 and Exxon in crisis, and the oil industry globally in crisis. So let's take a break and we'll be back.
All From One Supplier is pleased to announce its online shipping for West Indian and American groceries. Order online at allfromonesupplier.com and with free shipping and deliveries to any part of the United States. Save time and energy to shop for all of your West Indian groceries from the safety of your home or office. We carry West Indian products like curry powders, meats and fish, dashing bush, pepper sauce, sodas, and your favorite snacks. All From One Supplier has it all. All From One Supplier fulfills and ships your order directly to you. So visit All From One Supplier today to start shopping, or call All From One Supplier at 718-551-3292 to handle all of your West Indian grocery needs. That's All From One Supplier, 718-551-3292. Free shipping, free deliveries, or curbside pickup from allfromonesupplier.com. Travelspan has low fares on American Airlines, Eastern Airlines, Caribbean Airlines, and JetBlue. Let Travelspan shop and compare prices for all 4 airlines. Guyanese now have choices, so book your preferred airline through Travelspan. Call Travelspan at 718-845-0437 for the lowest deals between New York, Miami, and Guyana. That's Travelspan at 718-845-0437. From Miami to Guyana, rates are as low as $186 one-way and $417 round-trip. Deals from New York to Guyana are as low as $191 one-way and $475 round-trip. And Travelspan is also offering shop and ship. So if you cannot travel, you shop and Travelspan will ship all your items for you. So call Travelspan today in New York at 718-845-0437. In Georgetown, 227-1701. In Berbice, 337-4287. And in the West Coast Demerara, 269-0140. Travelspan has several offices to serve all your needs, so call Travelspan today. Logistics International, based in Trinidad with representatives in Guyana, is pleased to announce its shipping services from Trinidad to Guyana. Logistics provides shipping services and has experienced personnel to handle all of your shipping needs from Trinidad to Guyana. Buy in Trinidad and let Logistics handle all of your shipping to Guyana, from small boxes to container sizes. Call Logistics in Trinidad at 1-868-336-8218 to handle all of your shipping needs, and they handle all sizes. Logistics International has been shipping for over 22 years to many Caribbean countries with reliability and dependability. Call 1-868-336-8218 in Trinidad. That's 1-868 888-336-8218 or email at liclcargo@gmail.com.
Welcome back to Globespan Roundtable, and we are discussing today what are the good and bad experiences around the world in oil-producing countries. We have an eminent group of gentlemen around the table here today. We have Rafael Mendez from Venezuela, Floyd Haynes from Guyana, and Timothy from Guyana, well-known political leader in Guyana. Now we are going to shift the conversation a bit. This is a question I'd like to ask you, gentlemen. In an age with decreasing oil prices, $40 a barrel, and changing energy mixes, everybody is moving towards renewable energy. And with the current new president in America, we are going to have a very strong shift into that direction. Do you gentlemen think there are unique challenges that Guyana will face? And if so, what are those challenges?
Okay, so let me say something.
Yes, give it a shot.
So you can say oil equals energy, or you can say oil equals products, finished products. So it depends on which way you take, okay? You will have problems with the alternative energy substitutions that you will have, okay? That is the reason why you have to avoid to be an oil exporter. You have to transform the oil in products. Then you can forget about eolical energy or atomic energy or anything. You have to transform the oil in products. I think that's the main point.
Lloyd?
Yes, I think oil is but one part of the energy equation or the energy solution. The other parts, of course, are wind, solar, and water, hydro. And as we speak now, all of these things are being contemplated. They are all on the table. Together, they will make up the total solution. There are talks about a Myla Falls like, may not be the same one, but that's hydro. There are considerations for solar. There are considerations for wind farms. And these are not things that I'm thinking about. I know they're being contemplated, so that's a good thing. But make no mistake about it, fossil fuel is going to be around for a long time. And Guyana has to manage its production in an environmental friendly way, with careful consideration to the environment, making sure that we comply with all the rules and regulations. And I think we're doing that. It's going to be challenging. You know, there is a big brouhaha years ago by the developing countries, and they were basically saying, you know, the developed countries have gone on and done their thing and developed, and now it's our turn. You're telling us, well, you can't use your energy to develop. You've got to be mindful of that. But I think they've sort of worked that out. But I think, Paul, to your question, oil is just one cog in the wheel of the energy solution. And I think all of the others are being considered in a real way. And I think Guyana will come out of this with a total energy solution.
Tim, what's your perspective on that?
There are a lot of alarms going on, aren't there, about electric cars and the short life expectancy of the oil industry and that kind of thing, and the recent contractions of ExxonMobil itself as a company.
Exactly.
I agree with Floyd. I wonder if those aren't a bit alarmist. I mean, we hear that Sweden is planning to stop the importation of diesel vehicles from 2030 or something, and some other countries are doing the same and are talking about it. But that is at the very cutting edge of a progressive country that is trying to look ahead. India has 1 billion people. China has 1.3 billion people. Those people all want to drive cars. Delhi is polluted because of the number of cars driving around in Delhi. They don't have the luxury that those cutting edge countries have in Europe of saying, oh, we have the money to change everything and we're going to be driving electric vehicles in no time at all. And that's where the bulk of the market is, in those countries that got all of those millions and billions of people, not Norway and Sweden that got a couple million. So I think it's a bit alarmist.
Okay.
We are, of course, seeing the effects of global warming, and that has to be borne in mind. And as Floyd says, we have to manage our responsibilities carefully. One of the things I know that we've already done wrong is how we've negotiated, drafted, and signed on the dotted line of our existing oil contracts. Those oil contracts do not place very much responsibility with ExxonMobil in the event of oil spills and that kind of thing. And I have not seen any evidence that we have insured adequately or at all against the eventuality. And I know that we don't have the facilities in Guyana. Our Coast Guard certainly can't go and do an oil cleanup. So I know that we have not adequately protected for contingencies. So we started out wrong. But it's still early days and we can fix it. With our small country and our small population, we have an enormous benefit that is going to be coming by way of a windfall. And it's not going to be a 5-year benefit. It's going to be 10, 20, 30, 50 years. We have to figure out how to use it. We have to figure out how to get the benefit now. We have to figure out how to avoid the fears that will arise later on as inflation does begin to bite and as our local labor costs go up. But if we can ensure that before those problems begin, we have already set up our medical facilities and our infrastructure in terms of education and roads and bridges so that agriculture and mining have a boost. If we have our road from Brazil so that we're accessing Brazilian goods and providing a port in the Caribbean Sea for Brazilian goods, if all of that is done in the next 5 years, 10 years, then we're on the road, we're on track. I think that the opportunity is enormous. The question is how we use the money to develop our infrastructure to make the most of what's coming.
Floyd mentioned the hydroelectric project as an alternative to the dependence on oil. Rafael, you are aware that I've always been in love with the state of Bolivar and had a very personal relationship with the governor there, Velasquez, for many years. And I was always fascinated with the fact that Venezuela used the oil money to set up what they call Corporación Venezolana de Guyana. Bolivar is the largest state, and they had the hydroelectric project, the Guri Dam. They had bauxite and venelum. They had iron ore, and they had the smelter for it. What happened? Why is it that the Guri Dam and that hydroelectric project did not resolve the alternative energy needs of Venezuela? What happened there? Rafael got hit off there. So I guess we'll have to wait to see how we'll get reconnected. He probably has a problem with the internet. So while he will take his time and probably come back, Floyd, I would like to discuss with you and Timothy another issue, and that is the role of the Sovereign Wealth Fund in Guyana. How do you see a sovereign wealth fund addressing the challenges that will arise from this discovery of oil? How do you all see it shaping in the context of Guyana's reality?
Well, as I said earlier, the monies from oil, there has to be some analysis done to determine how the oil revenues will be split and how the monies will be used. Because as I said, Guyana has certain developmental needs. Tim mentioned several of them. We have the need for infrastructure. Oh, should I continue?
Well, okay, Rafael, did you hear what I asked you?
Sorry, gentlemen, we enjoy in Venezuela the worst internet in the whole continent, okay? So I lost the connection for a while, so I couldn't hear anything. I was
Okay.
out of line.
Well, we'll come back to you. We'll go back to the hydroelectric project in the Guri Dam. That was what I was asking, but we'll get back to it. We are talking now about the Sovereign Wealth Fund. In Guyana, there's a lot of discussion about us having a sovereign wealth fund because all across the world there are sovereign wealth funds. And so I was asking an opinion with the oil discovery in Guyana. I find it strange that we had bauxite and gold and nobody spoke of a sovereign wealth fund. But suddenly we have oil, there is a sovereign wealth fund. So I want to understand, why is it with gold and oil and bauxite and so forth, we did not have a sovereign wealth fund, and now with oil we want to have one? What is this about, Floyd and Timothy? What's your opinion?
Well, I don't know why we want to have one, but we should have one, right? But the sovereign wealth fund is something that has to be considered very carefully, because the purpose of a sovereign wealth fund is for future generations to benefit from the oil. But as I said earlier, we also have some immediate needs. So that balance has to be struck between benefits for future generation and currently. The other thing about the sovereign wealth fund, it has to be managed properly. You cannot use the sovereign wealth fund as a slush fund. There has to be strict rules surrounding who can invest, who can withdraw, what can the monies be used for. Sometimes some developing countries has used the sovereign wealth fund as a developmental bank. Bad idea. The sovereign wealth fund really is there to take care of booms, well, particularly busts in the oil cycle. When you have a bad time, you can tap into it to supplement the operating budget. So those are the types of things I think has to go into it. You have to protect the body or the corpus of the fund and use the proceeds, the profits. This is what they do in the Alaskan model. The fund itself is not used to fund anything. It is the monies, the income from the fund, so that the body of the fund is kept intact. And it's the same thing in the Norwegian model. And I think that's the kind of thing we have to do in Guyana. We can't just start taking money out of the fund to do this, do that, those kinds. Budget shortfalls and deficits and those types of things, again, has to be managed. But you've got to have that fund. There has to be policies and conditions restricting arbitrary withdrawal of those funds. And then it has to be managed accordingly.
Tim, what is your view on this sovereign wealth fund? We're not hearing you.
I agree with Floyd. And Floyd has 3 times so far said something that no one's picked up on, but I want to pick up on it now because it goes back to competent and transparent governance and good systems. It goes back to competent leadership. You see, yes, 2 of those models, indeed, they got a sovereign wealth fund and they spend the income from that fund. But that discussion sidesteps exactly what we're discussing. How does that income get generated?
Yep.
That income gets generated because you go and you deposit it somewhere where you got competent trustees who invest the money sensibly. And where are those competent trustees? They're in Chase Morgan, they're in Barclays, they're in Lloyd's. Why is it that our leaders will start an investment bank that Floyd rightly says, don't do that, and we will lose money doing exactly the same kind of investment that we are trusting the foreigners to do? Now, I want to make it clear, I'm not disagreeing with what Floyd said because he's right. I don't trust the local leadership to run any bank, and that money needs to be invested somewhere where the trustees can be trusted. So yes, we need the sovereign wealth fund. It needs to be set up to guard against the eventuality of dips and the vagaries, the fluctuations in the market, so that there is a constant income. That is what it's there for, and we need to acknowledge our own limitations. So at first, that fund is set up and run by people who know how to run it, so that we have guaranteed minimums of income, guaranteed minimum percentages, which a lot of the trust arrangements do.
Yes.
I hope one day we have the type of competent, qualified, professional, educated leadership that we can open a local bank, that we can open local unit trusts, local investment opportunities, that our stock exchange is up and running. I hope for that day. But at this stage, I very sadly have to agree with what Floyd is saying.
Rafael, what has been the experience in Venezuela with the sovereign wealth fund? Did you have one?
Okay, we tried to have one, okay? It didn't work because the problem is that you have these big amounts of money. So people get greedy, okay, too much money. So we try to produce a little more money from that money, and then you start having a little more riskier investments. Because the problem of these funds is where are you going to invest? That's where the problem is. You get greedy, you try to get a little more, it's a little more risk, okay? And at the end, if you really have the decision not to touch the money, as the people from Norway, they only take the interest. But in our countries, where we don't have the financial structures, okay, to invest those big amount of money, and as Timothy said, you have to put your trust on foreign companies, okay, on foreign financial companies, and we all have seen all these financial crises happening from time to time. So the funds are risky because you really don't know who to trust. And it's not only your leadership that can have the best intention, but you are going to put that money somewhere. So who will be watching the guys that are investing the money? Who is going to watch the banks or the funds, the international big funds, where you are putting the money in? So our experience wasn't good. And at the end, we started putting the money everywhere, okay? Politicians came, and you remember, Paul, you were there. You even wrote a book about Venezuela, okay? You remember the Workers' Bank? You remember that?
Yes.
We opened a bank for the main sindicato. Sindicato in English, Paul?
The
Yeah,
oil.
okay.
Yeah.
We even gave them money to open their own bank. And at the end, it was a disaster.
And also, one of my colleagues at the Central University, a professor, under Chavez, she opened the Women Bank.
Okay, yeah.
There was a women bank. She was a good friend of mine. Now, Rafael, so much for the sovereign wealth fund. The reason why I'm raising this is, I think sometimes when we belong to a developing country, the World Bank, the IMF, the developed countries come to you and say, well, oh, you have to get this, you have to get that, you have to get the other. And then I ask myself the question, do we really need that? Should we think of an alternative, as Timothy liked to emphasize, in the context of our reality? So anyhow, it seems to me that there is consensus in Guyana that we need a sovereign wealth fund, though most of the ordinary people do not probably know exactly how it will work. But it's interesting that in Venezuela and in other countries, corruption killed it. In Angola, it was killed. The daughter of the president of Angola is so rich that you can't believe. And she owned a bank where she deposited all this corrupt money. And then we have the same problem in other countries. So corruption definitely is a problem. And you are raising another issue, the risk in investment and who make those decisions. And then again, the point is raised that we had a mortgage crisis here in the United States in 2007, 2008, and it was horrible. a lot of people went bankrupt and so forth. So there are no saints in Wall Street, and there is no absolute expert there that they guarantee you that they will invest your money and it's safe. There is no, you know.
Mhm.
So I am aware that life is about uncertainty. As a matter of fact, I have a friend at the IMF who they have been working over the last 3 years on the World Uncertainty Index. Everything is uncertain. The world in which we live, the World Uncertainty Index. Now I want to get back a little bit, and then I'd like to ask people or audience, they could use the number 631-782-9272. They could use their WhatsApp with their iPhone, and they could ask questions. They could give their opinions. So I encourage those of you who are listening to the program to come in and give your views. None of us here have a monopoly on wisdom or knowledge in any way. But Rafael, in the meantime, let's get back to the hydroelectric project, because like the sovereign wealth fund, that's another issue that has been bandied in Guyana for a number of years. We are a country of a lot of waterfalls. And in Venezuela, I remember in the state of Bolivar, and I always was fascinated by this, by Ciudad Guyana, because it's next door Essequibo, and out of that jungle was carved out a brand new city. And I think the oil revenues were used by the Corporación Venezolana de Guyana, and they helped to develop the iron ore, the smelter, the Guri Dam. What happened to the Guri Dam? What happened to the hydroelectric projects in Venezuela? Why over the years it did not resolve the energy issue in Venezuela?
Okay, the answer is political. We got Chavez in the country. That's it. Okay, we were exporting energy to Brazil, okay? We were producing enough energy for most of the country. Now, I don't know how many turbines you have in Guri, but what I heard is that it's just one that is working. So remember, all the infrastructure in the country has been destroyed because there is no maintenance, there is no inversion, there is nothing, okay? It did work. It was destroyed. Okay?
So
But it was a very, very good investment. In one moment, it was the biggest hydroelectrical plant in the continent.
exactly.
Okay, well, it's destroyed now.
Well, it seems to me we keep coming back to this recurrent theme about leadership, management,
And
integrity,
corruption.
and so forth, and corruption and so forth. And these seem to be common issues that we are facing with whatever it is we're thinking about. You know, it reminds me about, I wrote two booklets in the 80s, one on the nationalization of the bauxite industry in Guyana and one on the nationalization of the sugar industry. I never supported nationalization of the industries for the main reason that it was the politicization of the industries, not nationalization. In any case, I have quotes where Haslin Paris, who used to run the bauxite industry, said, look, at some point you have to stop. You all are using the bauxite industry, he said that, as a milking cow for all kind of crazy political projects. When we had the sugar windfall and we had a great income from bauxite, they use it for mass games and for the militarization of the country. So we don't have to go to other countries, Venezuela and other countries also, to learn about what has happened in our country, that we could learn to understand that as we move forward, whether it's the sovereign wealth fund or whether it's the way we are managing a new economy in Guyana, that it seems to me that something has to be done, or or how do we monitor this? Who does it? Does civil society do it? Do people like Timothy do it, being a political leader in the country? Who does it? Who will look and ensure that we have good governance? It's not only political, it's in various spheres of the society. Timothy, you give it a first shot because you're sitting on a saddle there of a political party.
Well, Paul, you are starting from a premise that I've already tried to steer us away from. The government should not be involved in commercial entities. And
Okay.
every example that you give, every example that Mr. Mendez gives from Venezuela is an example of a failed government-run commercial entity. So when you say, oh, it failed and it fell apart because there was no maintenance, you know, you got your car or you have your house, and because it belongs to you, you look after it. You make sure you maintain it. It's when it doesn't belong to you that you allow it to fall into decrepitude, like we allowed Gaisuko after its nationalization to fall into decrepitude. Government ownership of business is not a successful model. Time has proved that over and over and over. So when you try to conflate good management and good governance, you're already going wrong. Government must be small. Government must create the environment for private investment, and an investor must come and spend his shillings, spend his money, risk his venture, and sink or swim. That is how it must be done. So when that hydro dam comes along, it must be through private investment. If you want an to build an estate, it must be through private investment. Gaisuko comprises a number of estates that were developed and built through private investment and then nationalized and run down into the ground. And that is the model. So if your model demonstrably fails because of poor leadership by political hacks who are put into position that don't know what they're doing or with the best intentions allow it to fail or are corrupt, then that model is bad. Let's change it. Don't let's start on that road. It's
Well,
about investment.
before I go to get Floyd's comments, I want to say a cite from the booklet I wrote about the bauxite industry. So Forbes Burnham was then the prime minister of Guyana, and he went to the bauxite industry. And he had a meeting with the workers, and the workers keep saying, Prime Minister, we do not have things to cloth to clean the machinery. And he ignored the worker for a couple of times, and the worker keep insisting. And then he remarked, he says, what are you talking about? I am not a prime minister of old cloth. You have to find a way to deal with that. So the point was that in a multi-million-dollar industry like the bauxite industry, they did not even have old cloth to clean, to maintain that industry. It was remarkable what happened in Guyana. And therefore, and another point I want to make, one thing I'm happy about Guyana today is that the debate is over whether we should have capitalism or socialism in Guyana, because that debate about socialism and capitalism virtually destroyed Guyana in the minds of generations of people, because it didn't allow us to think freely about how we can develop our country in the context of our own historical experience or cultural experience and so forth. So I'm glad at least people have accepted that we are now part of a global world system and that we have to make do, and we have to be innovative, adaptive, and creative within that system, because there's no way a little country like Guyana is going to create a new world system. So Floyd, what is your view about the comments that Timothy just made about how to approach managing these industries?
Yeah, well, I think Tim is 100% right. The less government is involved in something, the better. But there is a role for government. You know, you can have all the systems, all the policy, all the experts, and none of it will work unless the people that are facing these challenges are involved in a way. You know, to have real change, you have to define a problem in light of the values the people hold. And this is the problem. This is my issue with the World Bank and these type institutions. They define the problem one way, in Ghana and they says, okay, we go to Guyana and they come up with a solution and they copy that solution and duplicate it.
Yeah,
You've got to define a problem in light of the value system of the supporting people. And there are times that those people themselves are going to have to change their attitudes. They're going to have to change their values, some of their value systems, their beliefs, and those types of things in order to embrace the change that is necessary. That requires a kind of leadership that can begin to get people who can put public interests against their private interests. What I'm really saying is that the policies, the solutions, they're all out there. Why hasn't it worked? And I'm saying there is a supporting cast that's always invisible. It's the actors, it's the people in the system. And that, my friend, requires leadership. I believe it's a little too soon to tell. I believe Dr. Ali's the right leader for this time. He's young, he's visionary, and he's not constrained by the baggage of past grudges. And therefore, he has an excellent opportunity to provide that kind of adaptive leadership that I think is necessary to transform that country. Ultimately, the people are who is going to have to hold the leadership and the government accountable. But those people can't just wake up and do that. They have to be brought along into that process where they can develop the tools to do that. I think we're off to a good start. Let's just, it's too soon to tell, but I'll continue to watch and to monitor.
Well, on that optimistic note, let's go for the second break.
All From One Supplier is pleased to announce its online shipping for West Indian and American groceries. Order online at allfromonesupplier.com and with free shipping and deliveries to any part of the United States. Save time and energy to shop for all of your West Indian groceries from the safety of your home or office. We carry West Indian products like curry powders, meats and fish, dashing bush, pepper sauce, sodas, and your favorite snacks. All From One Supplier has it all. All From One Supplier fulfills and ships your order directly to you. So visit All From One Supplier today to start shopping or call All From One Supplier at 718-551-3292 to handle all of your West Indian grocery needs. That's All From One Supplier, 718-551-3292. Free shipping, free deliveries, or curbside pickup from allfromonesupplier.com. Travelspan has low fares on American Airlines, Eastern Airlines, Caribbean Airlines, and JetBlue. Let Travelspan shop and compare prices for all 4 airlines. Guyanese now have choices, so book your preferred airline through Travelspan. Call Travelspan at 718-845-0437 for the lowest deals between New York, Miami, and Guyana. That's Travelspan at 718-845-0437. From Miami to Guyana, rates are as low as $186 one-way and $417 round-trip. Deals from New York to Guyana are as low as $191 one-way and $475 round-trip. And Travelspan is also offering shop and ship. So if you cannot travel, you shop and Travelspan will ship all your items for you. So call Travelspan today in New York at 718-845-0437. In Georgetown, 227-1701. In Berbice, 337-4287. And in the West Coast Demerara, 269-0140. Travelspan has several offices to serve all your needs. So call Travelspan today.
Gentlemen, we are back in the program and we'd like to invite our listeners to ask questions, to share their views. And there is a number on the screen that we have been asking you to respond to. It's 631-782-9272. 631-782-9272. And you could use your phone and WhatsApp. And you can come in, you could show your face, or if you prefer not to, and you could ask a question, give your opinion. So it's open. because I have heard that many people have commented that they don't get a chance to be interactive in these programs. So you have a wonderful opportunity now, and I'd like to invite you. Another point I'd like to make before we go on to the discussion is that some people have said also we don't have females on the program and young people on the program. Well, next month, on the third Wednesday of next month, Floyd and I have put together a team of 3 females, and representing the millennial generation that will participate, and with Timothy and Floyd, and we'll be discussing emerging leadership in the country and local government councils. So we are. I read some of the comments and we are addressing it. So, gentlemen, how do we go back to the original question of the discussion today? Can Guyana learn from the good experiences and the bad experiences of oil-producing countries? Can each one of you itemize? Let's take for example, the good experiences. What 3 things or 2 things we can learn from any place that you would consider as good experience that Guyana should look at? I'm not saying we should swallow it and import it just like that, but I'm saying it's something that we should consider, we should try and adapt, and we should try and be creative of how we introduce it into our society. To each one of you, let's deal first with the good experiences. You have had a very good discussion on the good and the bad experiences, but how do we itemize it now? Can I start with you, Timothy? What would be 1 or 2 or 3 good experiences from your knowledge that can be useful for us?
Sure. I agree with Floyd on the Sovereign Wealth Fund.
Okay.
There needs to be an account set up out of Guyana so that we're not hit with an immediate and strong overflow of cash, with a guaranteed minimum interest rate income and a transparent method of accessing to avoid corruption. That will see us through bad days, and it will also allow us to regulate a steady but allowable flow of cash to meet our infrastructural needs and our development needs. I think that's important. The second thing we got to do is recognize our limitations. In 2006 in Uganda, for example, the government was very frank. They said, we in Uganda do not have the expertise to pretend we know about gas and oil. We need foreign expertise, foreign help, until we can learn it ourselves. Now, our folk like Rafael Trotman went signing contracts, not knowing what they're doing and not troubling to think about it overly. They didn't exert themselves too much. And we've already made bad deals that we are stuck with. I think that it's time we recognize our limitations, allow the oil people to do their thing, and recognize our strengths, which are mining, agriculture, timber, fishing, and develop our infrastructure to meet our strengths. And third, I would like to see our labor force evolve as we use the side products, like we were talking about plastics, so that we can find specific areas where we can use products for our benefit, recognizing that Guyana's market is so small that we're not making sense if we try to develop factories and things for local consumption. But there are products that can be used to develop to meet our specific needs. Those are 3 good things I would like to see.
Wonderful. We have only a few minutes left for the program, so I'm not going to ask that Floyd and Rafael give 3 examples, just 1 each, and then we'll close the program off. Floyd, what 1 powerful good practice or that we could learn from others apart from the wealth fund which has been discussed?
I think disaggregating the management of the oil sector, so you have various aspects of that sector, all not being combined into one, being managed under one umbrella. That creates a separation of duty, and it mitigates a certain level of corruption. The other thing I would say quickly is we ought to develop and protect our other industries, our value-added industries, that goes beyond oil and gas. And those are two things, I think.
Rafael, what one good practice from Venezuela, from your 100 years of experience, that Guyana should look at and consider seriously?
Okay. As I agree 100% or 200% with Floyd and Timothy, I'm just going to introduce a question instead of a suggestion, okay? And I know a lot of people is working in this area. Because we are talking about corruption, leadership, governance, and everything, okay? So, talking a little about game theory. How can we create a framework of incentive so we can make our leadership, that we can make our society to work, okay? To motivate the people in the proper way, which are the incentives, which is the framework that we have to create to motivate people to do things in the right way. Because at the end, that's the most important thing. And we are expecting that the leaders work properly, not. But what if there is a way to create this framework? I mean, and that's pure game theory, to motivate people to do the things right.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very, very much for having participated in this roundtable. And we leave with a very optimistic note that Guyana is in a unique position to learn from the experiences of countries all over the world. We have a lot of assets inside our own country. Most important, we are hoping that now that we have political stability, with having gone through a very difficult election process, almost similar to what is going on in the United States, that we are in a very good position to make very good use of the oil resources for the development of our country and our people. So until next time, for Globespan, I'd like to say good night and wish that in the next program, our listeners would call in and that they will participate in the program. Goodbye, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.